I still remember the first night I reached the lake, the water dark and still under a silvered moon. Fog slithered across the surface like a living thing, curling around the rocks and trees at the shore. The cabins nearby were quiet, their windows glowing faintly, but something about the reflections on the water felt wrong. I could hear the soft hum of insects, the distant rustle of leaves, yet beneath it all, a deeper sound lingered, a low, almost imperceptible vibration, like something waiting just beneath the surface. My boots sank slightly in wet earth as I stepped closer, and I thought I saw a figure in the mist, pale and unmoving, staring from the far edge of the lake. I blinked, and it was gone. But then the whispering started, soft as breath, and the ripples on the water formed shapes that shouldn't exist. That's when I saw it, a shadow stretching unnaturally across the lake, moving toward me, silent but deliberate. I never should have opened the cabin door that night. The lake was still. Fog curled over the water like smoke, thick and slow. I could barely see the far shore. The air smelled damp, faintly of moss and wet wood. A thin chill crawled along my arms. Every step toward the cabin felt heavier. Through the mist, the first cabin appeared. Its windows were dark, silent, like empty eyes. The door sagged slightly on its hinges. I reached out. The wood was rough, splintered. A faint hum lingered in the air, almost beneath hearing. Inside, the floorboards groaned beneath my weight. Everything smelled old, like dust pressed into the walls. A soft draft whispered through a crack in the ceiling. I could feel the fog pressing against the windows. Shapes moved just beyond the glass. I blinked, and they were gone. The table was set, though nothing had eaten here for years. Plates, small cups, a tarnished silver spoon. I traced my fingers over the wood. It was cold, sticky, almost alive. The hum returned. It was slower now, pulsing beneath the floor. I wanted to leave, but my legs didn't move. Outside, a single tree leaned over the water. Its reflection trembled in the pale light. The lake rippled, though no wind moved. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, soft, careful, brushing against the walls. I held my breath. Nothing, only the hum. I moved toward the cabin's back door. The handle was icy. It gave way with a shudder. A narrow path ran along the water's edge. Fog dripped from the branches above. Something rustled beneath, low and patient. I followed it. The path wound between pale reeds and dark water. The hum throbbed through the mist, growing louder, closer. Then silence. Complete, it pressed against my ears. I turned. The cabin was gone. Or maybe it had never been more than shadow. The lake stretched endlessly, fog curling higher, curling lower. My reflection shimmered in the water, pale and wrong. I thought I saw someone behind me, but the space was empty. A soft breeze carried the smell of smoke, not from fire, but something older, hidden. It made my skin itch, crawl, shiver. I stepped forward, water lapping at my boots. The hum returned. Now it was words, whispered, barely there. My name. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms. Water soaked through my clothes. The fog thickened, pressing my eyes shut. Then the path ended. Nothing but lake. Nothing but silence, humming beneath. I sank to my knees. The water was cold, unforgiving. The fog curled over me, hiding everything. A pale light flickered on the far shore. I couldn't move toward it, couldn't run from it. It waited. I closed my eyes. The hum became breathing, soft, patient. I was not alone. The fog clung to the shore, thick and low. The lake's edge shimmered under pale morning light. Each ripple smelled faintly of mud and cold water. I walked along the sand, boots sinking softly. Footsteps followed me, soft, uneven, but the beach was empty. The air felt heavy, damp on my skin. A paddle floated near the reeds. It drifted slowly, sideways, without a current. I knelt. The water lapped at my fingers, icy and still. It smelled faintly of rot and rain. I stood. The fog shifted. A shadow moved, pale and long, along the waterline. A bird called somewhere distant. Or maybe it was nothing. The footsteps grew clearer, echoing in rhythm with my own. I wanted to listen, wanted to follow, but my breath caught. I could feel the fog pressing against my chest, sticky and cold. The paddle shifted again, as if nudged by an invisible hand. I reached for it, hesitant, fingers trembling. It floated away. I stepped closer to the reeds. Soft rustling brushed against my calves. Nothing emerged, only reeds bending, water trembling. The sky dimmed slightly, clouds rolling over the pale light. Each movement made the echoes louder, as if the lake remembered my steps. A faint hum lingered beneath, a heartbeat beneath the fog. I crouched, watching the water. Ripples formed in circles, spreading, then vanishing. Each pulse felt deliberate, aware. The shoreline stretched endlessly, fog curling into shapes I almost recognized. A tree leaned low, branches trailing in the water. Something hung from it, swaying. I couldn't see clearly. My eyes felt heavy, wet with mist, but I felt it watching, patient, still. A breeze lifted, carrying the smell of wet pine and something older. I shivered. The echoes on the sand answered each of my steps, soft, reflective. I crouched again, tracing a line in the wet sand. It vanished almost immediately. The fog pressed closer. The paddle floated past me once more. Now it was near, unnervingly slow, as if waiting. I didn't reach for it. The lake went quiet. Ripples faded. Footsteps stopped. I sat on the sand, cold and damp. The fog swirled around me, curling over my shoulders, hiding the world. The lake reflected nothing. I could feel my own breathing, soft, measured, mingling with the silence. Every shadow seemed alive, patient, waiting for me to move. I didn't. I let the fog wrap me, let the lake fold me into its quiet. The paddle drifted further away. Footsteps remained behind me, or perhaps within me. The light shifted, pale, unreal, brushing the water with cold fingers. The echoes of my steps lingered, soft, insistent, like a promise. And then, nothing. The forest was quiet, though not empty. Branches creaked under a wind I could barely feel. The ground smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Lanterns flickered in distant cabins. Their pale light stretched across the trees, uneven, trembling. Shadows moved, brushing the trunks like slow fingers. I walked among them, careful, each step pressed into soft soil, cold and damp. A rustle came from just beyond my vision. Something watched. I could feel it in the gaps between the trees, lingering in the fog. The air tasted faintly of smoke and moss. The light from the cabins flickered again. One blinked faster, like it was breathing. I held my breath. Leaves whispered over one another. A branch tapped against another, hollow and deliberate. I thought I saw a figure, pale and thin, vanish behind a tree. The path narrowed. Roots curled like sleeping snakes under my feet. My fingers brushed the bark. It was rough, sticky with sap. The lantern stretched further. Shadows twisted toward me, longer, darker, more alive. A hum rose faintly, beneath the wind, beneath the fog. I paused. Silence pressed against my ears. Then soft footsteps. I spun. Nothing but the trees, swaying patient. The lanterns flickered again, closer now. Or was it farther? The forest seemed to breathe with me. Every shadow followed. Every whisper lingered. I felt the hum pulse in my chest. A pale light caught the edge of my eye. Something moved just beyond it, watching, waiting. I wanted to look directly, but my head felt heavy, slow. The lanterns blinked in unison. The forest held its breath. And then the light went out. Darkness folded in around me. The fog pressed tight against my skin, cold, damp, alive. I could smell the wet leaves, hear the hum beneath the earth. I stepped forward, unsure. Branches scraped my arms, wet with dew. The shadows from before had not left. They had only shifted. A flicker returned. One cabin, one lantern, casting a thin triangle of light. Something moved in it, slow, deliberate, waiting. I froze. The hum became breathing. Soft, patient, just beyond touch. The trees whispered secrets I couldn't understand. The lanterns blinked again, shadows dancing toward me, but always just out of reach. I stayed still, letting the fog wrap around me like a shroud. I could feel the forest gaze, unblinking, patient. The lantern swayed once more. I stepped back, slowly, each foot sinking into the damp earth. And then the light vanished. The hum receded. The forest folded into quiet, thick and unbroken. I stood alone. Branches pressed against my shoulders. Shadows lingered, patient, watching, waiting. The morning fog hung low over the lake. It wrapped around the dock like soft silk, damp and cold. Water licked the wooden posts, slow and steady. A canoe rested at the end of the dock. It rocked gently, almost like it was breathing. The paint was chipped, the wood swollen with moisture. I stepped closer. The boards groaned beneath my weight, wet and slippery. A faint smell of algae and rot drifted up from the water. The canoe shifted again, rocking side to side. No breeze moved the surface. No one was near. I reached for the rope, tying it to the dock. It was slick with mist, cold against my fingers. The hum of the lake seemed to grow louder, low, patient. Then it was gone. The canoe had vanished. The water stretched smooth, empty, unbroken. My breath caught. The fog pressed in, thick and heavy, wet against my face. I could feel shadows curling beneath the surface. I leaned over the edge of the dock. The water was still, but every ripple looked wrong. Something beneath it moved, slow, deliberate, watching. I stepped back. Soft footsteps brushed the boards behind me. I spun. Nothing. Only the fog, curling around the posts, thick and silent. The dock creaked. A faint rustle of reeds along the shore. The lake smelled faintly of smoke, though no fire burned. I could feel the hum beneath my feet, through the boards, through the fog. It was steady, low, like breathing or waiting. The canoe had not moved by wind, yet it had vanished completely. I crouched to touch the water, cold and smooth like glass, stretching endlessly. Ripples formed in circles, spreading outward. A shadow passed beneath the fog, long, thin, shifting. I blinked and it was gone. The dock seemed longer than before, stretching into gray. Each board pressed wet and alive beneath my hands. I smelled the lake again, mud, decay, and something older hidden. The fog shifted, curling against my arms, against my face. I could feel something patient, watching, waiting from just beyond sight. A faint reflection moved in the water, pale and wrong. I wanted to step back, but my legs were heavy. The lake seemed to breathe beneath me, rising and falling slowly. The hum rose with it, soft, deliberate, patient. Then a single ripple. The water shivered as if something passed beneath. Nothing emerged, only the fog, curling, shifting, hiding. I took a step back. The dock groaned beneath me. The fog pressed closer, swallowing the far shore. The lake lay still again. The canoe did not return. The hum receded, but shadows lingered, patient, watching. I stayed at the edge, letting the fog curl around me. Cold droplets clung to my hair and clothes. The water reflected nothing but gray, endless and quiet. A faint light flickered far across the lake. I did not move toward it. The canoe was gone, and the fog held me. The pines were tall, endless, swaying under a gray sky. The ground was soft with needles, damp and springy beneath my boots. The wind brushed against my face, cold, carrying the faint smell of sap and moss. Voices drifted with it, soft, distant, calling names I didn't know. They were slow, deliberate, curling through the branches. I paused. The trees seemed to sigh, creaking, bending. A hollow echo followed each sound, like the forest itself remembered them. The wind shifted, and the voices moved closer. I could feel them brush against my skin, brushing my hair, my neck. Each syllable lingered in the air, faintly sweet, faintly wrong. Branches tapped one another, a slow rhythm. The ground was littered with pine cones, wet and sticky. I could smell decay beneath the fresh needles. I stepped forward. The voices answered each movement, soft footsteps of sound across the forest. I tried to ignore them, but they seeped into my bones. Shadows stretched across the trunks. Some moved, some stayed, but all seemed to watch. I shivered, cold creeping along my spine, damp fog curling around my legs. A faint hum rose beneath the wind. It pulsed softly, like breath beneath the earth. I pressed my palms of bark, rough and alive, almost vibrating. The voices whispered again, patient, teasing. I didn't recognize the names, but each sounded like a warning. The pines swayed, bending closer, leaning in, listening. I could feel the fog pressing tighter, damp against my cheeks. The hum became louder, more insistent. Something slid behind a tree. I caught movement, pale and slow. I held my breath. The wind carried faint smoke from somewhere I couldn't see. It made the forest smell older than memory, quiet and patient. Soft footsteps echoed beneath me, though the ground was empty. Every step I took rippled through the forest, calling something unseen. The voices paused, waiting. A single pine bent low over the path. Its shadow stretched across the needles. I sensed it watching, patient, silent. The fog thickened. I could barely see my own hands, pale in the dim light. The voices drifted, lingering just beyond the reach of my sight. I crouched, listening. The ground smelled of wet earth and distant smoke. A soft hum pulsed beneath, like the forest was breathing with me. I rose slowly. Branches scraped my arms, wet with dew. Sticky. The whispers followed, patient, curling in my mind, twisting through my thoughts. A faint glow touched the edges of the pines. I didn't move toward it. The wind carried the voices farther into the trees, patient, waiting. I stayed still. The hum receded slightly, leaving only the creak of the pines. The fog wrapped around me, thick and quiet. And the names, they lingered, soft, fading, haunting. The forest opened onto a small clearing. The ground was soft with moss and fallen needles. A pale light filtered through the trees, muted, cold. A lone tent stood in the center. Its fabric flapped softly, though the air was still. A smell of damp cloth and smoke lingered around it. I stepped closer. The earth pressed wet and springy beneath my boots. Every rustle of leaves felt deliberate, echoing in the silence. Inside the tent, a campfire smoldered. Ashes glowed faintly, though no one had been here. The smoke rose thin, curling against the pale light. I crouched at the entrance. The air smelled faintly of pine and something older, acrid, hidden. The fabric brushed my shoulders, sticky with dew. The tent shifted slightly, soft, deliberate, as if something moved just beneath the surface. I reached forward. The ashes were cold at the edges, but still warm in the center. A faint hum rose beneath the clearing, low and patient. Branches creaked above, swaying without wind. Shadows stretched from the trees, long and thin, toward the tent. I could feel them leaning, watching, waiting. A soft breeze slipped through the tent flap. It carried the smell of damp earth and faint smoke. The campfire glimmered, orange and restless, as if alive. I stepped inside. The ground was warm in patches, soft under my fingers. The air seemed to pulse with the hum beneath my boots. Something brushed past the side of the tent. I froze. Nothing moved outside, only the gentle sway of fabric. The glow of the campfire flickered, stretching shadows across the canvas. Shapes shifted in the corner, long and patient. The silence pressed close, thick and cold. I knelt to the ashes. A faint smell of charred wood and pine rose from them. It felt recent, though the clearing was empty. The tent flapped again. I could feel it brush my cheek, damp and cold. A shadow lingered just beyond my vision, patient, unblinking. I leaned back, heart slow and uneven. The hum beneath my feet receded slightly. The campfire glowed faintly, stubborn against the silence. Outside, the forest waited. Branches scratched lightly against one another, whispering in the fog. The tent seemed to breathe softly, alive, watching. I stepped back, letting the flap fall against me. The smell of smoke lingered in my hair. The clearing stretched pale and empty, silent and patient. I stayed at the edge, listening. The wind did not move. The fire pulsed faintly, shadows dancing without heat. And the tent waited. The fog hung low over the lake. It curled around the shoreline, damp, cold, and patient. The water lay smooth like glass, reflecting pale gray light. Ripples formed, slow, deliberate, spreading outward. No wind moved them. No one touched the surface. I leaned closer to the edge. The air smelled faintly of wet wood and moss. Each ripple caught the light. Edges sharp, almost deliberate. Shapes emerged. Perfect circles, triangles, strange geometric patterns. They shifted and stretched across the water, precise, impossible. I reached a hand toward them. The water was colder than the fog, damp against my fingers. It trembled slightly under my touch, though nothing else moved. A soft hum rose beneath the fog. It pulsed in rhythm with the ripples, low and patient. I could feel in my chest, vibrating softly with each breath. The shoreline seemed longer than before. Trees leaned closer, shadows stretching toward the water. Branches creaked, slow and deliberate like sighs. The ripples twisted, forming shapes that reminded me of faces. Eyes, hollow and still, staring back at me. I blinked, and the water seemed to shift, teasing, patient. The air grew colder. Mist clung to my clothes, my hair, heavy and wet. The smell of damp earth and hidden smoke filled my senses. I stepped back. Soft footsteps pressed against the sand behind me, echoing in rhythm with the ripples. I turned. Nothing. Only fog, curling, thick, endless. The water pulsed again. This time the shapes were elongated, stretching toward the far shore. Each movement felt deliberate, aware, waiting. A pale light flickered through the fog. It caught on the edges of the ripples, highlighting sharp, impossible patterns. The lake seemed to breathe slowly, gently, alive. I knelt at the water's edge. The ripples licked my fingers, cool, precise, like they were forming something. The hum beneath my feet became clearer, almost words, almost breathing. The shapes shifted again. Now they resembled hands, reaching, patient, calm. I couldn't move closer, couldn't look away. The fog pressed in, heavier, damp against my cheeks. Every breath I drew tasted faintly of smoke and cold water. The ripples pulsed in quiet rhythm, waiting. A branch tapped softly against the shore. I could feel eyes behind it, patient, still, observing. The shapes in the water shimmered, then vanished, leaving the lake smooth again. I stayed at the edge. The hum receded slightly, leaving only the gentle lapping of water against the dock. The fog curled over the lake, patient, protective, alive. The ripples returned, faint, small, almost imperceptible. I watched them form and fade. The lake held its secret, patient, endless, waiting, and I waited with it. The sun had just dipped, leaving the lake wrapped in pale light. The air was warm, almost sticky, but the dock. The wooden planks pressed icy against my bare hands. I stepped forward slowly. Each board groaned beneath my weight, damp and slick. A faint smell of algae and rot rose from the water. The fog clung close, curling around the posts, soft and patient. Ripples moved across the lake, spreading slow, deliberate, without wind. Something brushed my hand. I froze. The dock was empty. The air pressed against my skin, heavy, damp, a soft impulse beneath my feet. I could feel it vibrating in the cold boards, patient, low. The water shimmered, silver in the dim light, still and endless. I reached forward again. Nothing, only the lingering touch, soft, fleeting, impossible. A branch tapped against the railing, slow, deliberate. The fog shifted, brushing my face with damp fingers. The lake seemed to breathe. Small waves pressing against the dock. Shadows stretched long across the boards, twisting toward me. I leaned closer to the edge. The water reflected nothing, only gray, endless, patient. The hum rose, threading through the fog, curling into my chest. A faint ripple formed. It moved like a slow heartbeat across the water. I could feel in my fingers where they pressed the icy planks. I stepped back. Branches rustled behind me, brushing against one another, patient. The dock seemed longer, stretching into fog I couldn't see through. Something moved again along my arm. Cold, soft, brushing my sleeve. I turned. Nothing. Only the fog, curling, waiting. The planks beneath me creaked. The hum receded slightly, but the air grew thick, sticky with quiet. I could smell the lake, wet earth, decay, and faint smoke. A distant light shimmered on the far shore. It flickered, pale, hesitant. The dock felt alive, patient, pressing against my hands, waiting. I crouched. The water licked my boots, cool and precise. The hum returned, steady, slow, like the breath of something beneath the surface. I stayed still, letting the fog curl around me. Soft shadows stretched across the boards, long and unblinking. The air pressed close, damp against my cheeks. The touch returned, light, impossible. My fingers tingled where it brushed the wood. The lake mirrored nothing, but I felt it watching. I rose slowly. The dock groaned beneath my weight, patient, alive. The fog pressed tighter, folding over the posts, over me, and then silence. The hum faded. The water lay still. I didn't move. The dock waited. And I waited with it. The lake stretched quiet beneath a pale, waning sky. Mist clung to the water, curling, thick and patient. The smell of wet wood and algae drifted through the air. Ripples moved across the surface, slow, rhythmic, rising and falling like soft breathing. I noticed a shadow beneath them, long and dark. It moved in perfect rhythm with the waves. Not too fast, not too slow. Patient, careful, unblinking. I leaned closer to the edge. The boards beneath my feet were cold, damp with dew. A faint hum rose from the water, low, almost imperceptible. The shadows shifted, thin at first, then widening, stretching beneath the lake. It mirrored the waves, following them, alive with intent. The fog pressed closer. It curled around my legs, wet and soft. Every breath I drew smelled of cold water and something older, hidden. I could feel it beneath me, beneath the lake's surface. The water trembled slightly with its movement. I wanted to step back, but my legs felt heavy. A breeze lifted the mist, carrying the faint smell of smoke and mud. The shadow followed every pulse of the water, patient, waiting. Its edges seemed to shimmer, like it was almost not there. I knelt at the water's edge. The waves licked my fingers, icy and precise. The shadow pulsed beneath, keeping perfect rhythm. A soft creak echoed across the dock. Branches swayed in the fog, brushing against one another, slow, deliberate. I blinked. The shadow seemed closer, stretching toward the shore. The lake breathed beneath me. The hum rose in quiet harmony with the waves. The shadow moved, patient, unblinking, aware of every motion I made. I stepped back slowly. The water reflected pale light, gray and endless. The fog pressed against my face, damp, curling, alive. Ripples spread across the lake again. The shadow followed each one, precise, patient. I could feel a pulse beneath the dock, beneath the water, beneath the mist. It lingered, moving with perfect rhythm. I couldn't see its form clearly, only its presence, dark, heavy, patient. The lake seemed to hold its breath with me. A single wave broke at the dock's edge. The shadow recoiled slightly, then resumed its silent dance beneath the surface. The hum faded, leaving only the soft lapping of water. I stayed at the edge, watching. The mist curled around me, hiding everything beyond the dock. The shadow moved with the waves, patient, endless, waiting. And I stayed still, listening, feeling suspended between the fog and the water. The lake lay silent beneath a pale, gray sky. Mist curled along the water, thick and patient. The air smelled of wet stone and cold moss. I noticed it then. A faint glow on a distant rock. A lantern, swinging slowly, though the air was still. I stepped closer along the damp shoreline. Each step pressed into mud and small pebbles, cold and slick beneath my boots. The glow wavered with each ripple of the lake, patient and deliberate. The fog thickened, curling against my arms. The water lapped softly at the rocks, gentle, unbroken. The lantern swayed, almost like it was breathing. I could feel a hum beneath the surface. Low, patient, threaded through the mist. It pressed against my chest as I watched the distant light. Shadows stretched in the rocks, long, thin, reaching toward me. I blinked, and the lantern appeared closer, though the lake had not moved. The reflection shimmered, fractured across small waves. I crouched by the shore. The air was damp, sticky against my skin. The faint smell of smoke mixed with wet stone, curling into my hair. Something shifted behind the lantern. I could feel it move beneath the glow, subtle, deliberate. No figure emerged, only the faint sway of light and shadow. The fog pressed thicker, curling around my shoulders. Each ripple of water seemed to pulse with quiet intent. The hum rose slightly, threading through my fingers where they touched the rocks. I stepped closer to the edge. Small stones crunched softly beneath my weight. The lantern moved again, swinging, patient, unblinking. The lake reflected it in pieces, broken by tiny waves. It looked like a hand, then a face, then only light again. I blinked, and it remained, swinging slowly, impossibly still in the air. A branch tapped softly behind me. I turned. Nothing, only fog curling over water and shore. The hum receded slightly, leaving the swaying lantern alone in the mist. I stayed crouched, letting the cold press against my legs. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, of something hidden beneath the rocks. The lantern swung, tracing impossible arcs, patient and deliberate. The water licked the stones at my feet. I could feel the hum beneath the surface, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. Shadows stretched toward the lantern, but never reached it. I did not move. The fog pressed closer, curling around my hands and hair. The lake held its breath, patient, endless. The lantern swung once more, slow, deliberate, almost human, and then it faded into the gray, leaving only cold stones and quiet water. I stayed at the edge. The hum had disappeared, but the air felt heavy, watching, and the lake waited. The shoreline stretched quiet beneath a gray, settling sky. The water lapped gently against rocks, cold and steady. Mist curled along the edge, damp and patient. I walked slowly. Each step pressed into wet sand, soft, uneven. The air smelled of salt and moss, of something older beneath the water. Footsteps followed. I didn't hear them, not truly, but I felt them matching my pace, patient, deliberate. The boards of the old dock groaned beneath my weight. A branch tapped against another, slow, careful. The fog pressed close, brushing damp against my cheeks and arms. I glanced behind me. Nothing, only fog curling, stretching over the lake like a shroud. The footsteps continued, invisible, echoing in rhythm with my own. I could feel their weight, soft and deliberate, pressing into the sand. Shadows stretched across the water. Each ripple seemed to carry a pulse, small and deliberate. I shivered, cold pressing into my shoulders, damp curling around my neck. A soft hum rose beneath the lake, low, patient, threading through the mist. I pressed my hand to the sand, cool, wet, trembling beneath my fingers. The footsteps quickened slightly, still silent. I could feel them pacing beside me, patient, unblinking. The shoreline bent, curving into fog. I stepped closer to the water's edge. The waves licked at my boots, cold, precise, deliberate. Branches tapped overhead, swaying without wind. The footsteps followed, just behind me, keeping pace. I turned sharply. Nothing, only fog and shadow, patient and still. The air grew heavier. Every breath carried the smell of damp earth and faint smoke. The hum beneath me rose, pulsing with the invisible rhythm. I slowed my pace. The footsteps slowed too, matching me. I tried to stop, to listen, but they stopped as well, hovering, patient. A ripple spread across the lake. I could feel the pulse in the sand beneath my boots. The shadow of movement passed beneath the fog, impossible, precise. I walked again. The footsteps followed, patient, deliberate, echoing in step. The shoreline stretched, endless, fog curling around my ankles. I crouched, letting the water wash over my fingers. The hum receded slightly, leaving only the subtle rhythm of the unseen. The footsteps lingered, just beyond perception, patient, unblinking. The fog pressed in thicker. It wrapped my arms and hair, damp, cold, alive. I could feel the shore breathing beneath me, beneath the waves. I rose slowly. The footsteps mirrored me again, precise, silent, impossible. The lake lay still, gray and endless, waiting, and I walked with them, feeling the unseen pace beside me. The fog pressed thick over the campsite. Damp earth smelled of pine and wet cloth. Every branch creaked softly, swaying though the air was still. I found it lying on the ground. A notebook, edges curled, soaked at the corners. The leather cover smelled faintly of smoke and mildew. I opened it carefully. Pages whispered under my fingers, soft, brittle, patient. Inside, names were written, one after another, fading into smudges. Campers vanished. Dates next to them, precise, deliberate, some months old, some years. The last entry caught my eye. Dated this morning. The ink still faintly wet. A chill crept up my spine. The mist curled closer, damp against my face and hair. I could smell the lake faintly, brackish, cold, patient. I flipped the pages slowly. Each camper listed with location, notes, small marks, silent warnings perhaps. Some pages had scratches, as if someone tried to erase what had been written. The hum of the forest rose softly beneath the fog. Branches tapped against one another. The notebook felt heavier in my hands, pulsing, patient. I noticed the handwriting change near the last entry. Wobbly, uneven, almost frantic. A faint smear of red faded against the page. Outside, the mist swirled over the tents. Shadows stretched across the ground, thin and patient. I could feel eyes somewhere beyond the fog, unblinking, waiting. A faint scrape behind me. I froze. The notebook smelled sharper now. Smoke, damp, something metallic. I tried to read the last line. It simply said, "Gone." No name, no time, only the word, patient and final. The ground beneath me felt softer, wet, as if the earth itself remembered each vanishing. The hum beneath my boots pulsed slowly, rhythmical, almost like breathing. Branches creaked above, swaying despite still air. I looked toward the tents. Everything seemed untouched, silent, yet the fog pressing closer, curling around posts, around canvas, around me. I pressed the notebook to my chest. The pages felt warm, impossibly alive. I could hear faint footsteps, soft, careful, matching none of my own. I knelt briefly, letting the mist curl around my hands. The smell of damp earth and distant smoke mixed with the cold air. The notebook vibrated faintly, pulsing with something unseen. I stood slowly. The last entry remained open, staring back at me. Gone. The forest waited. The fog swallowed the paths, the tents, the lake beyond. Shadows pressed in from the edges of my vision. Every breath I drew tasted of damp pine, faint smoke, and something older. I took a step back. The notebook slipped slightly in my hands, pulsing with silent insistence. The footsteps continued, patient, around me, never touching. And I realized the notebook had not been left. It had been waiting. The lake lay still beneath a sky heavy with gray. Fog curled along the shoreline, damp, patient, pressing close. The smell of wet earth and pine drifted across the air. I knelt at the water's edge. The surface was smooth, mirror-like, reflecting pale light, but something felt wrong. Shadows lingered on the lake. Not my own. Dark, thin, stretching, twisting against a reflection of trees. I leaned closer. The air smelled faintly of smoke, damp moss, and something older hidden. The shadows moved subtly, curling around each ripple, patient, deliberate. The hum of the water rose softly, low, constant, threading into my chest. I pressed my fingers against the icy edge of the lake. The reflections twisted, branches bent impossibly, stretching toward me. The shadows followed, patient, aware. A breeze stirred. Mist brushed my cheeks, wet, cold, soft. The lake shimmered unnaturally, edges curling like smoke. I tried to blink it away. The shadows remained, stretching across the water, watching. It felt like they knew me, patient, unblinking. The hum grew, faint, deliberate. I could feel in the boards beneath my feet, in the mud at my knees. The water pulsed with each heartbeat, slow, precise. Ripples spread across the reflection. The shadows twisted with them, forming shapes too deliberate to be natural. Faces, hands, impossible arcs of darkness. I stepped back, leaving faint footprints in wet sand. The fog pressed closer, curling against my shoulders, damp, alive. The shadows mirrored each step, patient, slow, unyielding. I crouched again, letting the water touch my fingers. The hum receded slightly, leaving only the soft pulse of shadow across the lake. A faint metallic smell rose from the water, cold and precise. I watched the surface. The reflections twisted further, shapes merging, separating, patient. The lake held a presence, alive, endless, waiting. The wind carried faint creaks from branches behind me. I could feel eyes, unblinking, hidden beyond the fog. The shadows on the lake followed, patient, deliberate, impossible to escape. I rose slowly, trying not to disturb the mist. The water shimmered, the shadows twisting, curling around each reflection. I pressed my palms together, warm against my chest, cold against the damp air. The lake seemed to breathe beneath me. Each pulse of the water mirrored the shadows, the hum, the unseen weight. The fog pressed tighter, damp and curling, alive around my legs. I stepped back once more. The reflection returned to stillness, pale and quiet. But the shadows lingered, patient, endless, waiting beneath the surface. And I stared, knowing the lake reflected more than reality. The lake stretched gray beneath a cold, low moon. Mist curled along the shore, damp against my arms and face. The smell of wet stone and pine filled the air. I saw it then, a figure, pale, standing at the far edge of the water, unmoving, patient, watching. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moon. Not a reflection, alive, patient. I stepped closer. The boards beneath my feet creaked softly. Mist curled around my boots, damp and slow. The air smelled of cold water and something metallic. I could feel a pulse, faint, from the ground beneath me. The figure did not move, but I felt it breathe with the night. Shadows stretched from its body, long, thin, curling across the rocks. Every ripple of the lake echoed faintly in my chest. The fog pressed closer, wrapping around my shoulders. I blinked. The figure remained. Its eyes, two pale embers, followed patient, unblinking. A soft rustle came from the trees behind me. Branches tapped together slowly, deliberately. The lake pulsed faintly, small waves pressing against the shore. I stepped back slightly. The figure's glow intensified just a little, faint and cold. Its presence pressed into the air, damp, heavy, almost alive. I could hear something beneath the water, a hum, low, patient, threading through the mist. The reflection of the moon shimmered strangely across the figure's eyes. The wind stirred the fog. It brushed my hair, damp, curling, soft. The figure remained still, patient, impossible to approach. I knelt, letting the wet sand touch my fingers. The hum beneath my boots pulsed faintly, deliberate. The pale eyes never wavered, patient, watching. The mist pressed thicker, curling over the rocks. The smell of pine, cold earth, and faint smoke layered around me. The figure remained distant, its gaze unblinking, eternal. I took a slow step back. My breath caught, cold and damp in my chest. The figure did not move. The lake reflected the pale light of the moon. The figure mirrored it, impossible, faint, patient. I could feel its presence in the fog, around the rocks, beneath the water. I stayed where I was, listening. The hum receded slightly, leaving only the soft ripple of water. The mist curled around my fingers, around my boots, around the edge of the lake, and the pale figure remained, watching, patient, waiting. The air was still that night, heavy with moisture, thick with the scent of rain that never came. The forest felt awake, though nothing moved. I followed the narrow trail along the edge of the lake. Leaves clung to my boots, slick with dew. Every step sank softly into the earth. The moonlight bled to the canopy in thin, trembling lines. It painted silver across the path, then vanished again into shadow. The silence pressed against my ears. Then a rustle, soft, close. It came from the bushes to my right, low and deliberate, like something shifting its weight. The kind of sound that doesn't want to be heard, but can't help it. I froze, my breath fog in front of me, curling, faintly trembling. The bushes stilled. For a moment, there was nothing, only the slow drip of water from the leaves, only the faint hum of something unseen. I stepped forward again. The rustling followed, not behind, beside. It matched my pace, step for step, like an echo made of leaves. I turned my head. The bushes were still, but the darkness behind them wasn't. There was weight there, presence, watching. I could feel it settle on my skin, like static before lightning, like breath held just behind my neck. The air grew colder the longer I stood. Every hair on my arm lifted. Something waited, just beyond vision. I whispered into the dark. The sound didn't carry. It felt like the air swallowed it. Another rustle, this time slower, almost careful. The bushes trembled once, then stilled again, as if something inside them had stopped mid-step. I could smell the wet soil, the faint metallic scent of the lake nearby, the distant rot of fallen leaves. The silence thickened until it felt alive. It pressed against my chest. Each breath grew shallower, heavier. Then I saw it, a shape crouched low in the dark. Not a shadow, not quite human. The leaves shifted around it, bending toward its weight, as though the forest itself leaned in to listen. My body refused to move. The figure didn't breathe, didn't blink. It only watched. Something pale glimmered in the branches, an outline of a hand, maybe, or the reflection of something's eyes. I blinked. It was gone. The bushes sagged slowly back into stillness. Leaves swayed once, then hung limp and quiet. I backed away, one careful step at a time, my heartbeat drumming against the silence. Every time I moved, the leaves whispered faintly, as if repeating my steps. The fog from the lake crept toward the path, soft and low, curling between the roots. When I reached the bend in the trail, I turned once more. The bushes were still again, but in the fog, something shifted, just barely, a ripple of movement, as if something had leaned closer to watch me leave. I stood there until the cold crept beneath my collar, until the mist swallowed the trees one by one. The night returned to silence, but the weight of its gaze didn't. The lake was still tonight. Not calm, just waiting. A thin fog drifted across the surface, pale as breath against glass. Each ripple moved slow and deliberate, as if the water were breathing. I stood at the edge, boots sinking into the wet sand. The air was cool, but the water felt warm. It moved with a rhythm, soft, steady, like something whispering beneath the waves. I leaned closer. The surface quivered, tiny lines forming and fading, patterns that seemed too precise to be random. Letters. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks. The ripples bent together in small, curved shapes, spelling something faint, then vanishing again. I blinked, and another word formed. My name. The whisper came a heartbeat later, low and soft, like someone speaking from under the water. It said it again. Then again. My throat tightened. The air felt heavier now, thick with the scent of algae and wet stone. The kind of scent that clings to skin, that never really washes away. Each time the water touched the shore, I heard it, the same word, drawn out careful. It wasn't the way someone calls your name. It was the way someone remembers it. I stepped back, but the whisper followed, lapping closer with the tide. The moonlight broke across the water like glass. Every reflection was fractured, shifting with the ripples. And then, for just a moment, I saw a shape beneath the surface. Not a fish, not a shadow. Something slow, curling through the murk, too large to name. The whisper deepened. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was many, woven together like reeds in the current. Some murmured words I couldn't understand. Others just breathed. I knelt at the edge, the wet sand cold beneath my fingers. The water shimmered, reaching closer, as though it wanted me to listen. There were faces now, faint outlines beneath the fog, mouths moving, but never breaking the surface. One of them turned upward. Its eyes, if they were eyes, reflected the moon like broken mirrors. The voices hushed. For a second, the lake went completely still. Then, quietly, I heard it again. My name, right beside my ear. I turned, but no one was there, only the wind of the reeds, and the water pulling itself back into the dark. The reflections rippled again, stretching and twisting into strange shapes. They looked almost human, until they didn't. A pale hand surfaced for a heartbeat, thin, dripping, and vanished just as quick. The whispers turned to hums, low, steady, vibrating to the ground beneath me. My chest felt heavy. My breath caught. Each ripple formed smaller words now, sentences that melted before I could read them. The fog closed in around the lake, soft and suffocating. It hid everything but the water and the faint shimmer that moved across it. The voices began to fade, like the tide pulling away from shore. But the last word, the last sound, was mine. It was so gentle, so calm, it almost sounded like a lullaby. The ripples smoothed out completely. The water turned still again. Only my reflection remained, wavering faintly, as if something beneath it was still breathing. I stood there until the fog reached my feet, until the lake swallowed the moon. The whisper didn't return, but the silence that replaced it felt aware, and when I turned to leave, I could still hear it, just under the surface, waiting. The dock was empty that night. The lake stretched out like a sheet of ink, still and endless beneath the cold air. I came down for quiet, for the kind of silence that hums in your bones. The boards beneath my shoes were damp, slick with thin frost, each step whispering into the dark. At the far end, a single light hung above the water, a pale bulb, swinging gently from its wire. It flickered once. Then again, the reflection on the water trembled with it. A ghost of light, broken by ripples I couldn't see the cause of. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the bulb fight against the dark. Each time it dimmed, the air around me seemed to thicken, like the night was holding its breath. When it came back on, I saw a movement. Not on the dock, in the water, just beneath the surface, a shape, long, slow, almost human. The light buzzed softly and went out. The lake went black. I couldn't see the end of the dock anymore, only felt the wet wood under my boots, the faint vibration of the wire still swaying above me. When the light flickered back to life, the shape was gone, but the reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was darker, standing closer to the edge than I was, shoulders bent forward, as if peering into the lake. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The light blinked once more, and when it came back, the reflection was looking straight at me. My pulse pounded in my throat, but everything around me stayed quiet. Even the crickets had gone still. The bulb flickered again, faster this time. On, off, like it was trying to warn me. With every flash, the reflection shifted. Closer, then closer again, until it didn't look like a reflection at all. It looked like someone standing behind me. I turned, but there was only the empty dock. The fog had crept in, low and silver, curling around the posts. The light above hummed once more. I could feel it in my teeth, in my chest. When it dimmed again, I caught another glimpse of movement in the water, just at the edge of the dock. Fingers breaking the surface. They slid back down before I could move. The smell of wet wood grew stronger, something metallic beneath it, like rust. I backed away a step. The bulb swung harder now, casting wide, frantic shadows. And every time it passed over the lake, there were shapes, dozens of them, half-formed, rising and sinking with the waves. The flicker slowed. The light steadied, glowing dimly through the mist. There was only one shape left, standing at the end of the dock. It looked just like me, same height, same stillness, but its reflection didn't match mine. It stood still while I moved, then tilted its head just slightly as if listening. I could hear my breath echo back, not from my own chest, but from the water below. The bulb above hissed. A faint pop, then darkness, the kind that presses against your eyelids even when they're open. The dock creaked. Soft footsteps, slow, measured, coming toward me. I held still, feeling the boards flex under each invisible step. Then, a faint click. The dock light blinked back to life, swaying weak. There was no one there, only the faint outline of footprints, wet and glistening, leading from the edge to where I stood. The air was colder now, the fog thicker. It felt like something was still waiting beneath it, just out of sight. The reflection on the water rippled once more, and in that trembling light, I saw my face again. But this time my reflection smiled. The bulb buzzed a final time and went out for good. The silence that followed felt too heavy to belong to the night. I took a step back, and the dock creaked once more behind me. The fog had been thick all morning, too thick for the season. It rolled across the shore like breath, slow, deliberate, hiding everything but the nearest stone. I followed the waterline, boots sinking softly into wet sand. The tide murmured against the rocks, a quiet rhythm that felt off, like it was waiting for something. Somewhere ahead, the cliffs opened. I hadn't noticed the gap before. A narrow cut in the stone, half covered by mist. A cove, small, hidden, the kind that shouldn't exist on any map. I stepped closer, drawn by the silence. Even the waves seemed to hush as I crossed the threshold of rock. The air changed inside. Colder, thicker. It carried the smell of salt and old things that had been underwater too long. The fog drifted lazily through the mouth of the cove, curling like smoke around the walls. Each breath came out white, disappearing faster than it should. There were shapes in the mist, faint, slow-moving, too smooth to be branches, too fluid to be shadows. I blinked, and they scattered, melting into the gray air. The ground here wasn't sand. It was soft, spongy, almost like it had absorbed the ocean instead of resisting it. Every step left a hollow mark that filled instantly with dark water. Somewhere deeper in the cove, something shifted. A faint rustle, like fabric dragging over stone. Then stillness again. I stood there, listening to the quiet hum in my ears. My heartbeat sounded too loud, too alive for this place. The fog thickened. It brushed my skin when I moved, like the touch of something breathing beside me. I could make out the curve of the rocks now. They arched inward, forming a half-circle around a shallow pool. The water there was still, too still. It reflected nothing, not even the faint light above. I knelt beside it, trying to see my reflection, but there wasn't one, just darkness. Then a ripple, not from me. It spread outward from the center, gentle, deliberate, like something beneath had stirred. The shadows along the walls flickered. They seemed to pull closer, their edges bending toward the pool. I whispered something to myself, a word I don't remember, and the air around me answered, softly, mimicking the rhythm of my voice. For a second, I thought the fog was breathing. The shadows moved again, longer this time, stretching up the walls, curling into shapes that almost looked human, but not quite. Their heads hung too low. Their limbs moved too slow. When I stepped back, the water rippled once more, and something broke the surface. Just the edge of a hand, pale, dripping. It slid back down as quickly as it appeared. But the ripples didn't fade. They spread wider, pushing the dark water to the stone edges, until I realized the pool was rising. I turned to leave, but the entrance wasn't there anymore. Only fog, dense and unmoving. The shadows along the walls shifted again, closer now, almost touching the ground. Their movements were silent, like they were breathing through the stone itself. Then the water stopped rising. It stilled perfectly calm. In the reflection, I saw figures standing around me. 6, maybe 7, all facing the pool. Their outlines wavered, as if the water was shaping them. I looked up, but there was no one there, only the fog and the faint dripping of unseen water. When I looked back down, one of the reflections turned its head. Its face, if it had one, was blank, but it leaned forward, closer, until its outline touched mine in the water. The pool shuddered. A low hum filled the air. The fog around me began to thin, slowly peeling away from the walls. And for the first time, I could see the cove clearly. It wasn't stone, not entirely. The walls were covered in shapes. Hundreds of them, pressed into the surface like old carvings. Each one looked like a face. Mouths open, eyes hollow, as if they had been caught mid-scream. The air turned colder. The reflections in the pool began to move again, their shapes twisting, breaking apart like smoke and water. I backed toward where the entrance should be, feeling the cold crawl up my spine. And then, silence. The fog stopped moving. The water went still. The pool reflected nothing now. Not even me. I don't remember leaving the cove, only walking until the mist thinned, and the gray turned back into daylight. When I looked back, there was no opening in the cliffs, no sign of any hidden place at all. Just the water, quiet and endless, lapping softly against the shore. And when I blinked, for a split second, I saw my own reflection still standing in the fog. The mist had been sitting over the lake all evening. It moved like breath, slow and steady, rolling across the dark water. By the time I reached the dock, everything beyond a few feet had vanished into gray. The air was cold enough to sting. The boards under my shoes were slick with dew. Each step made a soft sound that disappeared before it could echo. There was no wind, no movement, just the pale reflection of the dock lights flickering in the still water. Then I saw it, a shape, drifting toward the shore. Small, wooden, rocking with a rhythm that didn't match the water's calm. An old rowboat. It moved slowly, like someone unseen was guiding it, just beneath the surface. The closer it came, the clearer it became that the boat was empty, except for something lying near the middle. A single shoe, dark, soaked through. It sat perfectly upright, as if it had been placed there carefully. I waited, watching as the boat bumped softly against the dock. The wood groaned, low and tired, like it had been waiting a long time to be touched again. The air around me felt heavier now, thicker, like the mist had weight. I knelt at the edge. The lake's surface rippled beneath me, sending faint waves that brushed against the boat's side. The shoe looked wrong up close. The laces were still tied, but the leather was swollen and pale, like skin left too long in water. I thought about pulling it out. My hand hovered there just above the surface. But something in the reflection below made me stop. There was a face. Not clear, not real, just a faint impression of eyes and a mouth, moving beneath the ripples. I blinked and it was gone. The boat rocked once, then went still again. I backed away. The mist seemed to follow me, curling low along the dock, clinging to my ankles as I stepped back toward shore. It was quiet, so quiet I could hear the faint creak of the oarlocks moving, back and forth, slowly. The boat wasn't empty anymore. Someone sat at the far end, facing away. Their clothes hung loose, dark with water. I froze. The shape didn't move, not even when the boat drifted slightly away from the dock again. The mist swallowed half of it. All I could see was the curve of a shoulder, and that one pale shoe, still in the same spot. I whispered, without meaning to, "Are you okay?" The figure tilted its head, just slightly, enough to make my chest tighten. No reply, just the soft creak of the wood, and a faint drip of water. I took one step forward. The boards moaned under my weight. The figure moved. Not much, but the shift was wrong. Too slow, like something floating, not breathing. The boat began to turn, angled now so I could almost see the face, but the mist thickened again, rolling over in a white sheet. I stepped back, heart hammering quietly in my chest. When the fog cleared, the boat was empty again. The shoe was gone. Only the oars drifted now, barely touching the sides, making soft circles in the black water. The ripples spread outward, wider and wider, until they touched the dock. Then they stopped. The air felt colder. Still, not even the insects moved. And then a faint splash. Far out, where the mist met the horizon, something surfaced. Just for a second. A shape, like a hand reaching up from below. Then it sank again. The ripples came back, stronger this time, pulling the boat slowly away, back toward the center of the lake. I stayed there, watching it fade into the mist until only the pale outline of the hull remained. It drifted in circles. Endless, slow circles. The fog never lifted that night. When I finally turned to leave, I noticed something near my feet. A wet footprint. Small, bare, pressed into the wood. It led toward the shore, away from the dock. I followed it a few steps, but it ended in the sand, as if whoever made it had walked straight into the water. When I looked back, the rowboat was gone. No trace of it left at all. Just the lake, quiet and gray, as if it had never been disturbed. But as I stood there, staring into the stillness, the surface rippled once more, and floating back toward me through the fog was a single dark shoe. It started just after sunset. The lake was glass, flat, endless, and still. The last streak of orange light had vanished behind the pines, and everything else was blue, muted, breathless. I sat at the edge of the dock, knees drawn close, watching the first stars flicker over the water. Even the insects had gone quiet. The only movement was a slow drift of mist spreading like thin smoke across the surface. That's when I heard it. A call, low, drawn out, rising from somewhere far across the lake. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was something caught in between, half laughter, half crying, echoing through the fog. I froze. The sound seemed to ripple through the air itself, bouncing from the trees, sliding across the water. Then it came again, closer this time. A long, Broken sound that didn't end where it should have. I whispered my own name before I even realized it, just to hear something human. The echo came back too fast. Too wrong. Like the lake repeated it for me. I stood up. The dock creaked beneath my shoes. Tiny waves brushed the edges of the wood. The air tasted damp, metallic, cold against the back of my throat. Then another call, softer, almost gentle, as if it wanted me to answer. It didn't come from one direction. It came from all around. The water, the trees, the fog itself. Every time I turned my head, the echo followed, a voice moving without shape. I tried to convince myself it was wind, but the trees were still. The air didn't move. Not a leaf stirred. And then I realized there was something faintly familiar about it. The rhythm, the way it lingered on certain sounds. Like the way someone calls to you when they're smiling or when they're pleading. My chest tightened. I thought of my brother. He used to play by this lake before he went missing. Before they found his shoes, but not him. I closed my eyes. For a second, I swore it was his voice, calling my name the same way he used to. But when I opened them, the mist moved. It folded in on itself, twisting, forming shapes that looked like people but weren't. Pale faces seemed to rise just beneath the water surface. Their mouths opened, silent, until one, just one, let out the same echo again. It wasn't a voice anymore. It was the lake. The entire lake was calling. I took a step back. My heels slipped on the damp wood, and my reflection rippled apart below me. When it came back together, it wasn't me staring back. The face was pale, eyes wide and dark, mouth slightly open as if whispering. I turned away, heart pounding against the quiet. Another call swept through the fog, longer this time, higher, like someone laughing underwater. Then another, and another, until it became a chorus. Hundreds of voices, crying, laughing, echoing over one another. The dock trembled beneath my feet. Tiny bubbles broke the surface of the lake, rising, bursting, then vanishing again. The air smelled like rain and rot, like something had just surfaced after being buried too long. I whispered my brother's name. The voices stopped. Everything went silent, so silent I could hear my heartbeat echo through my ribs. Then, in that silence, a single reply. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't clear, just a soft whisper, drawn out over the water. It said my name, and it sounded like him. I stepped forward. The water looked still again, calm, almost inviting. Something broke the surface. A hand, pale and slick, fingers curling upward, dripping with black water. The call came again, not from far away this time, from right beneath the dock. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the fog. The hand was gone. Only the ripples remained, spreading outward like invisible footsteps across the lake. Then silence returned, complete and heavy. The mist thinned just enough for me to see the far shore again. Empty, still, no voices, no shapes. But somewhere out there in the gray distance, a single call echoed one last time. So faint, so soft, it sounded almost like my own breath. And when it faded, the water whispered something back. A name, mine, again and again, until the fog swallowed everything. It was late summer. The lake was still, air thick with warmth and the faint scent of pine. I stood at the water's edge, watching the lanterns drift. They came from somewhere deep in the fog, each one glowing soft gold, like small hearts pulsing on the surface. The light trembled, reflected across the black water in thin, broken lines. No one else was there. No wind, no footsteps behind me. Just the slow rhythm of the water and the faint hiss of air through the reeds. I didn't know where the lanterns had come from. They hadn't been there an hour ago, and yet now they moved in perfect formation, one after another, sliding toward the shore. Thought I counted them. 7. No. 8. Each one carried a tiny flicker inside, a flame that didn't sway, as if it wasn't burning, just glowing. The mist around them pulsed faintly with each shimmer of light, almost like the fog was breathing with them. I stepped closer to the edge. The pebbles under my shoes crunched, wet and uneven. For a moment, I thought I saw shapes behind the lanterns, faint shadows half hidden in the fog. But When I blinked, they were gone. The first lantern touched the shore. It stopped, rocking gently in the shallows. The others slowed too, as if waiting for permission to join it. The water beneath them rippled in wide circles. No wind, no current, just movement, purposeful, patient. I crouched, reached a hand toward the nearest one. The air above it was colder, unnaturally cold. The flame inside flickered, then stilled, my breath fogged in the air. And for a second, I saw something reflected in the lantern's surface. A face. Not mine. Eyes open, mouth moving silently beneath the glass. I jerked back. The lantern drifted an inch away, as though recoiling too. I told myself I was tired, that it was just reflection, light on water, tricks of the fog. But then the second lantern touched the shore, and the flame inside it went out. One by one, each light dimmed the moment it reached land. The air grew heavier. The silence thickened until it pressed against my ears. And then, from the dark, something changed. A faint hum, low, rhythmic, like the lake itself was murmuring beneath its surface. I turned toward the water. The remaining lanterns had stopped moving. Their glow faint now, like dying embers. But their reflections were still bright, brighter than before. And they weren't aligned. The reflections weren't copying the lanterns anymore. They were moving on their own, tilting, leaning closer together, forming shapes that didn't belong. My chest tightened, the hum deepened, and I realized it wasn't coming from below. It was coming from behind me. Slowly I turned, along the tree line. Hundreds of faint lights were flickering through the mist. Lanterns, all of them floating between the trunks, hovering midair. Their glow was pale, almost colorless now, and they were moving, not toward me this time, but toward the water. One by one, they slipped down to the fog, merging into the lake's reflection, as if sinking into another world. Each time one vanished, a small ripple crossed the surface, soft, precise, and then I saw figures beneath the water. Not clear, just shadows, arms stretched upward toward the lanterns, their movements slow and weightless. The first shape touched the light. It dimmed instantly. The next did the same. Another light gone. Another ripple. Soon, the entire lake looked alive with motion, like hundreds of unseen hands were reaching through the surface. I stepped back. My heels sank into mud. The last lantern on the water flickered once, twice, then went out. And all at once, the fog fell silent again. No light, no hum, just the echo of water lapping at the shore. Then a faint glow returned. I looked down. The extinguished lanterns were floating closer, their glass now filled with something dark. Not water, something thicker, something that moved on its own. The nearest one touched my shoe, and the flame inside flared back to life. But it wasn't gold anymore. It was pale white, cold light, unflickering. It lit the ground beneath me, and there, faint in the reflection, I saw shapes again. Not just one, dozens, standing just beneath the surface, their faces turned upward, each one holding a lantern, each one waiting. The glow spread slowly, lantern to lantern, until the whole lake shimmered white, and in that colorless light, I saw them more clearly. Their lips moving, their eyes hollow, their skin rippling like thin film underwater. They were mouthing something, the same word, over and over, a whisper that didn't reach the air. Then, one by one, they turned away, drifting back into the deep, taking their light with them. The surface grew dark again. The fog returned. And soon it was just me, standing by the lake, alone. A single lantern floated at my feet, its pale glow steady. It waited, like it wanted me to take it. I didn't. I stepped back and watched it drift away into the mist. The water closed around it. The light faded. And for a moment, I thought I heard the faint hum again, somewhere far below, like the lake was whispering my name. It was near dusk when I first saw them. The forest was quiet, too quiet for summer. Even the insects had gone still. A soft wind brushed the back of my neck, carrying the damp smell of moss and pine. The light was thin, fading into gray. I walked the narrow path that wound along the ridge. Leaves shifted faintly overhead, a low rustling that seemed to pause whenever I did. At first, I thought it was the light playing tricks. Shadows lengthening, stretching between trunks. But then one of them moved. It slid behind a tree. Quick, fluid, as if it had been standing there all along. I stopped, listened, only my own breath, and the soft hum of air caught in the branches. The space between the trees felt different now. Heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Another movement, farther down the path. Something crossed a narrow trail, so fast I almost missed it. I told myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, but deer don't move like that. They don't stop and turn toward you. I felt eyes on me. Not close, but near enough that the air around me felt aware. The fog began to gather between the trunks. Thin at first, then thick enough that I could see it move in waves, curling around branches like fingers. I kept walking, slow steps, each footstep landing softer than the last. Every few paces, something shifted in periphery, a shape leaning out, a blur between bark and shadow. But when I turned my head, there was nothing, just still trees, and the low creak of the forest settling. My pulse moved slower now, not from calm, but from that deep, cold kind of fear that makes the body quiet. I reached a clearing, a small circle of light where the fog didn't touch. The air there was warmer, and for a moment, I thought I'd left whatever followed me behind. Then I saw it again, across the clearing, between two tall oaks, a shape leaned forward, slender, too tall, its edges blurred like smoke. I blinked. It was gone, but the air where it had been was darker, and the trees seemed to lean closer together, closing off the exit. The forest hummed again, low, vibrating through the ground. I turned in a slow circle. The shapes were back, one behind every tree, still, silent, waiting. They didn't step forward, but the distance between us shrank anyway. The fog made it hard to breathe, each inhale shallow, damp. And then, from the far side of clearing, a soft crack, a branch breaking, but not underfoot. It was higher, like something brushing past it, or hanging from it. The fog pulsed again, and for the briefest second, every shadow between the trees tilted toward me. I stumbled back. The shapes didn't move this time. They just shifted. One moment they were spread out, the next closer, as if the space between them had folded. I tried to look directly at one, to fix my gaze, hold it there, but my eyes slipped away, like it was impossible to focus. The forest spun slowly. Branches whispered above me. And then I heard something low, like a word being formed but never spoken. A breath, so close to my ear it lifted the hair on my neck. I turned fast, but the clearing behind me was empty. The shapes were gone, all except one. It stood where I had been, half in fog, half out, still blurred, but now it had depth, like something just beneath the surface of sight. I felt the urge to blink, and didn't, because I knew if I did, it would move again. So I stared. My eyes stung. Tears welled. And then, in the corner of my vision, another figure appeared. Then another, closer, nearer, until the edges of the clearing were full again. Dozens of them, each half-formed, their faces never visible. The air rippled softly, as though the world around me were breathing in slow motion. I couldn't tell if they were waiting or listening. Then the fog thinned suddenly, and the clearing filled with pale light. When it faded, they were gone. No shapes, no sound, only trees. I stayed there until the moon rose, watching the spaces between the trunks, the empty places where they had stood. The silence didn't lift. It only deepened, like the forest itself had forgotten how to speak. And as I finally turned to leave, I caught one last flicker, a faint shift in the corner of my eye. Something stepping back behind the trees, slowly, as though it didn't want me to notice. But I did, and when I blinked, it was gone again. The path ahead was dark, and I walked in silence, feeling watched, until the trees finally gave way to open air. Still, even now, I can't look at the spaces between trees without feeling that something is still there, waiting. It was early evening when I noticed the path. A thin trail cutting through the trees, barely visible under the low fog. The forest was quiet, damp from rain that had fallen hours ago. The air still held its scent. Wet earth, pine, something faintly metallic beneath it. I had walked this way before, many times. Every turn, every stone, felt familiar. But that night, something was wrong. The air hummed faintly, a soft vibration in my chest, like the forest was waiting. I followed the path, watching how it dipped and curved, how it vanished briefly behind a rise, then reappeared again. For a while it felt normal, safe, until I turned back. The trail behind me was gone. Not hidden, gone. No footprints, no flattened grass, just forest floor, untouched, as if no one had ever stepped there. I blinked, thinking maybe the fog had shifted. It hadn't. I took a few steps backward, slowly, watching my own prints fade. They didn't sink into the mud. They dissolved. Each mark softened, blurred, then vanished completely. The unease settled deep in my stomach. The forest stretched behind me, like it was swallowing itself whole. The air grew heavier. Each breath tasted colder. I looked ahead again, the path still there, leading forward into thicker fog. I didn't want to follow it, but there was nowhere else to go. The trees closed in tighter, their trunks dark and wet, dripping faintly. Every few steps, I thought I heard movement, like leaves brushing fabric, too close to be the wind. I tried to listen, tried to make sense of it, but the deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even my footsteps began to sound wrong, too soft, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Then I saw something ahead, a shape in the mist. It looked like the trail split in two, but when I got closer, it didn't. The ground itself was shifting. The soil rippled faintly, as if it were breathing. My stomach tightened. I knelt, touched the ground. It was cold, damp, but underneath there was no solidness, no earth. My fingers sank slightly, and I pulled back. The fog thickened. I turned again, searching for the way I'd come from, but it was gone. Only trees. Everywhere. No marks of direction. No footprints. No sign of where the forest ended. I called out once. My voice didn't echo. It just disappeared into the mist. I walked faster, then slower, then stopped completely. Each turn led me back to the same stretch of ground, the same twisted tree, with bark that looked almost scorched. I could feel something behind me, a presence that stayed just far enough to never be seen. When I turned, the trees seemed slightly different, shifted, rearranged. It was like the forest was rewriting itself. I stood still for a long time, watching the fog pulse around the trunks. It moved in small waves, breathing with the earth. Then I saw the ground ahead begin to fade, not vanish all at once, but dissolve in slow, delicate threads. The roots, the moss, even fallen branches, unraveling into gray air. I took a step back. The ground behind me did the same. It wasn't erasing the path. It was erasing the world. I moved faster now, heart thudding softly, hands brushing the rough bark, as if it could anchor me. The fog pressed close to my face, cold against my skin, well like breath. Somewhere behind me, I heard the faintest rustle, like something walking, but not touching the ground. I turned, and everything behind me was blank. No trees, no trail, just a wall of white, dense and unmoving. I whispered my own name, just to hear it, but the fog swallowed it instantly. Then I noticed it wasn't just the path fading. It was me. My boots no longer left impressions. My reflection, in a puddle, shimmered faintly, then flickered out like light. I felt a chill in my chest, as if something inside me had been unstitched. The world was folding in, the ground curling at the edges, disappearing into mist. I started running, though I didn't know where to go. The air grew thinner, the trees stretched taller, until their tops vanished into nothing. And then, just as suddenly, it all stopped. The fog broke. I was standing in an open field, dry, silent. The forest behind me was gone. No trees, no path, only flat earth, and wind that didn't move. The smell of rain was gone too. The world felt hollow, too clean. I turned once more, hoping to see where I had come from, but there was nothing, just smooth ground, untouched, like no one had ever walked there. I tried to step forward. The soil crumbled under my feet, not into dirt, but into fog. And in that faint white blur, I thought I saw a shape, someone walking ahead, disappearing step by step, leaving no trace at all. Maybe it was me. Maybe it always had been. The trail behind was gone. And this time, so was everything else. The cabin was smaller than I remembered. I reached it just as the sky dimmed. The last strip of light caught in the treetops. The air was colder here. Still, thick, the kind that clings to skin. Every sound from the woods seemed to stop at the clearing's edge. Even the wind refused to move. The door was slightly open. It hadn't been the last time I came. I waited, listened, nothing. The quiet had weight, not peaceful, but watching. When I stepped inside, the floor gave a faint sigh under my boots. Dust floated through a pale shaft of light, turning slowly, like it didn't want to settle. The air smelled faintly of ash, and something sweet, like rotting apples. The furniture was just where I remembered it. The old chair near the window, the kettle resting cold on the stove. Everything perfectly still, as if it had been waiting. I should have felt relief, but the silence pressed harder. It wasn't empty. It was listening. I closed the door behind me. The latch clicked softly, too loud for how quiet the cabin was. For a moment, I thought I saw a movement by the far wall. A flicker, a small shift in the shadows. When I looked again, nothing. The air felt thicker now. Breathing took effort. I told myself I was alone, that it was just the stillness playing tricks on me. But then the room exhaled. A faint movement in the curtains, a dip in the quiet, like something unseen had shifted its weight. I froze. My pulse felt too loud. Each beat echoed in my throat, slow and heavy. I stared at the window. Outside, the trees were black silhouettes, their edges blurred by fog. There was no reflection on the glass, only darkness. The chair creaked, soft, barely there. It leaned slightly forward, as if someone had just risen from it. I couldn't breathe for a second. The kettle rattled once, then went still. The silence after was worse than the sound. It stretched too long, too careful. Something about it felt deliberate. I backed toward the door, but the air behind me felt colder. I didn't turn. A faint warmth brushed my shoulder, like someone had stood too close, just long enough to leave heat. I stepped forward fast, but the warmth followed. I whispered, not words, just a sound, to hear something human again, but the air swallowed it. The walls felt tighter, the corners darker. Every shape looked like it could move if I blinked long enough. I kept my eyes on the chair. It hadn't moved again, but the cushion still looked pressed, as if someone sat there just moments ago. A faint hum filled my ears, not from outside, from the cabin itself, like the wood remembered every breath ever taken inside it. I wanted to leave, but my hand wouldn't reach for the door. It felt wrong to turn my back on the room, wrong to move while it was still watching. The air changed again, barely noticeable, but enough to feel it crawl along my neck. Something behind me shifted the floorboards. One step, then silence. I didn't turn, didn't breathe. My reflection finally appeared in the window, dim, distorted, but there was another shape beside it, taller, still, its head tilted slightly, like it was trying to listen. I blinked, and the reflection vanished, mine and its. The window showed only fog now, thick and white, pressing against a glass from outside. The door opened behind me, slowly, without a sound. Cold air slipped in, curling around my legs, pulling at me, soft as breath. I didn't move. Something waited at the threshold. I could feel it, not moving forward, not leaving, just waiting. The hum inside the cabin deepened, a low vibration that lived beneath the silence. It didn't come from the walls anymore. It came from me. The stillness pressed harder, until it was all I could feel, like the world outside the cabin had ceased to exist. My vision blurred. My ears rang. And then, Nothing. Only quiet. When I opened my eyes, the light had changed. Morning, maybe, or something close to it. The door was shut again. The chair still empty. The air still cold. But the silence was different now. Not waiting. Not listening. It felt full. I turned to leave and noticed a handprint on the inside of the door. Large. Fresh. Pressed deep into the wood. The shape of it matched mine. Exactly.